Why bother getting into healthcare in the first place?
That's a good question, Tori. I got a cold email from Dr. Alex Oshmayansky, who wanted to open up a compounding pharmacy in Denver to make generic drugs that were on the short supply list. There's a lot of impactful drugs that, for any number of reasons become short supply. And I responded with a bunch of questions, and I thought he was thinking too small. And as we went back and forth, that was right around the time the Pharma Bro was going to jail. And I was like, how can this guy raise the price of Daraprim to $7,500 or whatever it was? And he was like, well, he can. He can buy it and sell it for whatever he wants, particularly since he's got an exclusive on the manufacturing. I'm like, that's insane. Let me dig some more in. And it became quickly obvious that the pharmacy industry is as opaque as any industry, more opaque, other than maybe healthcare, more opaque than any industry I've ever been involved with. And that the easiest way to counteract opacity is transparency. And so that led us to creating costplusdrugs.com with the fundamental principle of a transparent price list. We'll show you our cost, we'll show you our markup, we'll show you our pharmacy filled fee, we'll show you our shipping costs. And now as we're growing our retail network at teamcubancard.com, we'll show you our pharmacies and allow you to pick it up there. And we started off with 110 drugs because those are the only manufacturers that would sell to us. They didn't trust what we were doing. They had heard it a million times that people were going to try to change the industry. And that's why I put my name on it, actually, to get the generic manufacturers to trust us. And we launched on January 22nd of 2022, and the rest is history. It's just blown up from 110 drugs to 2,500 drugs.
And without the Pharma Bro.
Yeah, without
maybe
the Pharma Bro,
happened.
right? Yeah, who knows what happened to him?
That was Mark Cuban of Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drugs. Welcome to the First Opinion podcast. I'm Torie Bosch, editor of First Opinion. First Opinion is STAT's platform for interesting, illuminating, and provocative articles about the life sciences writ large, written by biotech insiders, healthcare workers, researchers, and others. This week is a very special episode of the First Opinion podcast. Not only is Mark Cuban here, but so is Matthew Herper, who is a senior writer at STAT covering medicine and also oversees the editorial portion of STAT's events. So welcome, Mark and Matt.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thrilled.
So I am the generalist here, while Matt is the expert. So I'd like to start, Mark, by asking you something very basic. If you have to give a 2-sentence explanation of cost plus drugs to somebody who just does not understand the bigger issues that you mentioned in the intro, how do you do that?
When you go to the doctor, you need a prescription. They tell you, you need this drug. What's the next thing they say to you? What pharmacy do you use? And if you're a cash pay or high deductible, your heart immediately starts to beat faster because you don't know what that price is going to be. If you have insurance from an employer or a low deductible plan, say from the ACA, then it's not really a problem for you. But if your employer pays for your insurance and your medications, it's a problem for them because they don't know what they're paying for that medication either. So in both cases, whether it's the employer, in some cases even the ACA insures, or yourself, there is no transparency on pricing. And so now you can go to costplusdrugs.com, put in the name of the medication that's prescribed to you while you're in the doctor's office, and this happens all the time, and look to see what our price is. And then you can make the determination, is this cheaper than my deductible? If I'm a cash pay, now I know what it's going to cost me. And if I'm an employer, now I know what it's going to cost me. And so that's the value of cost plus drugs. And the net result of that is where there is a lot of really insane pricing in the pharmaceutical industry, particularly with what they call specialty generics, which are drugs that there's nothing special about them except they're more expensive. You might be able to realize hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars per month in savings.
So a lot of the drugs you're focusing on, all the drugs you're focusing on, I think, are generics and expensive ones.
They're not, though. They're not all generics. We're up to 74 brand name drugs, and that's growing by the day.
Let's get back to that. But for these original ones, things like these, the original example I think you guys used a lot was Gleevec, which is one of the best cancer drugs ever. Right. And the generic can be made cheaply available, but people are having to pay couple $1,000. Yeah,
per month.
Literally saving thousands of dollars a month.
Yep.
But you've been talking a bit lately about like the lessons for the larger system here, including the branded drugs. and you've had some thoughts about the pharmacy benefit managers in general. Give us a quick sketch of what the whole system should look like, given what you've learned over the past.
So right now, there are intermediaries called pharmacy benefit managers, and their mission in life is supposed to be negotiating with manufacturers because they're big and they can get better pricing. But they like not only being big, but getting bigger. And what they've done is they've introduced all these different their own intermediaries, subsidiaries and affiliated companies that they buy from and do intercompany transfers with, which puts them in a position to be able to increase the price of medications when they get to you. So when I mentioned earlier about the fact that you don't know what the price you'll pay is when you go to the pharmacy, a big part of that is because there's a pharmacy benefit manager as the intermediary between you and the price paid. And very often they set the pricing. And that's particularly the case with corporations. Corporations that self-insure and cover 165 million employees in this country, they negotiate with the PBMs to get what they believe is the best price. So for your example, for generic Gleevec, they might negotiate a rebate to be paid to them and not actually know what their net price is. And so effectively, because of these intermediaries called pharmacy benefit managers, nobody knows what the price they're going to pay for a medication is. And when they do find out, they often come to realize that it's a very inflated price, with them keeping what's called a spread in their own bank account.
Right. And it used to be that people paid a deductible and you had a drug benefit and a lot of your costs were covered. That's no longer true for, I think, for a large number of people. So it used to be that the rebates were, you could say they were going to bring down your costs.
They were passed through. And now, those big PBMs, the intermediaries, handle about 85%, give or take, of the prescriptions that are filled in this country. So that other 15% is handled by companies that are called pass-through PBMs. So there is a market there for PBMs that know how to do a good job. It's just trying to get more of them to be used by the federal government, the states, and by employers.
And there's also the problem with these PBMs that it's possible to actually push the list price of the drug higher and higher. The PBM wants the rebate. Right. The manufacturer just raises the price.
Exactly.
It's kind of what happened with EpiPen and insulin.
Exactly.
Again and again, right? So
they benefit. There's the patient's interest, financial interest, and the interest of these intermediaries, the PBMs, are not aligned. The higher the list price, the more money that the PBM makes in rebates from the manufacturers.
But doesn't somebody have to negotiate with pharma? Someone has to tell Pfizer or Novartis or AstraZeneca, we're not going to pay that much, right?
Yeah, I mean, yes. And if they passed along, the net price, then, let me rephrase this. I've sat in groups of CEOs and HR people and CFOs, and I asked a very simple question. What is the one thing that the biggest PBMs do for you that a smaller pass-through PBM couldn't do? Anybody raise their hand? Never. Because there isn't any one thing that those big PBMs can do that's differentiated or unique from the smaller pass-through PBMs. So while somebody has to do the negotiation with the manufacturer, it's the fact that these biggest PBMs are leveraging their scale to not only negotiate a better deal with the manufacturers, but not pass through that pricing to employers and payers, right? Even if it's a patient that's paying. And as a result, you get this wild mispricing of medications, which is where cost plus drugs came in. Probably one of the most impactful things that we've done, Matthew, is we published our price list. And so now for the 2,500 drugs that we carry, if you want to see what we sell imatinib for versus what you would pay at your pharmacy, or versus if you're an employer, if you can get the price, what you pay, now you have a reference price. And that's what the FTC used for a big part of their investigation. It's also what we've seen researchers do at Harvard and Vanderbilt, where they'll come out and say, if Medicare has bought these 9 oncology drugs from cost plus drugs, taxpayers would save $3.6 billion a year.
So, I think largely probably because of the work you've been doing, I think people increasingly understand that even if they don't know exactly how PBMs work, they understand that they are a middleman and increasingly being blamed for why everything is so expensive. But I sometimes wonder if that discussion is maybe going a little too far. So last year, I ran a first opinion here on STAT by Josh Wenzel, a family medicine specialist from Ohio, who argued, and quote, vilification of PBMs inadvertently aids big pharma by diverting attention from the real issues. And Dr. Wenzel, says that those real issues are how big pharma companies keep generics out of the market and drive up prices. What would you say about that? Do you think that the war on
Apples and
PBMs
oranges.
is
Yeah, apples and
okay?
oranges. So the issue of patents is real, right? Evergreening a patent is a problem, right? Doing these minimal extensions to try to get extensions on the patent is a problem. And so the pharmacies certainly are culpable for that, but PBMs do nothing to combat that. Nothing at all. That's a legislative issue, and people are dealing with that. In terms of the pricing, it's all PBMs, and so two things can be true at once, that the farmers are not doing the right thing and extending patents, and that PBMs are ripping people off.
Do you have anything planned to target the pharma end of that?
Well, we negotiate with them all the time, and I'll tell them, what you're doing with patents is wrong, but they're not going to engage because there's nothing I can do. It's not like I can pass a law that change. Even though I'll tell you a quick aside story, through the Electronic Freedom Foundation, EFF, I forget what exactly stands for.
That's what it used to stand for.
Yeah, yeah. Now it's just EFF. I literally funded a chair up until 2 years ago for 10 years, maybe, the Mark Cuban chair to eliminate stupid patents. Actually, it was dumbass patents, is what the official name of it was. I wouldn't let them change it. And we didn't go after pharma, but we went off after a lot of other patents. And so the point there being, I'm no fan of patent abuse, but I just don't have any leverage to be able to create any change there.
So what should that negotiation process with pharma look like, though? Who should do it? I mean, we've got this system that we built in coming from mail order originally. It's got its own long history. The rebates came in, and then the high deductible plans came in after that, right?
Yep.
How do you get from this system to something that works?
So the question really is, why don't you negotiate directly with pharma and have all their portfolio on costplusdrugs.com? And the answer is, we would love it. And even the manufacturers that we've talked to, all but one, and I won't say which, has said, yeah, we'd love it too. But the big PBMs are saying to them, if you work directly with them, even if it's at a higher price, we will not give you the same placement on our formularies. And those formularies, as with the PBMs deal, the PBM deals with sponsors, the self-insured employers, really drive sales. That's the sales funnel for manufacturers. And so any risk of reducing their sales, so they're saying they're not going to take that path. So they're saying to us, no, we can't do it now. My response then, to take it one step further, is going to CEOs of big self-insured employers and pointing out to them just how badly their PBM contract is ripping them off. A, they need to audit their rebates that they're getting. They probably don't align with the contract. B, they don't own all their data. It's just insane that you don't have access to randomized claims data of the members that your company pays for. So that makes it far more difficult for you to go to the manufacturers of a GLP-1 and say, we want to put together a wellness program. And we know that we have X number of people that we think, based off of their existing claims, would benefit from this. Will you work with us? They can't do that. Not only do they not get all the claims data, but B, they're not, by contract, not allowed to talk directly to the manufacturers. Maybe some of the largest can get this information and do that, but 90+% that I'm aware of don't have access to that. But wait, it gets worse. So, you've seen the whole market for Humira biosimilars, and you've seen some of the things that have gone on there. We sell a biosimilar called Usimry. It's $594 per month.
Mm-hmm.
And when we go to these self-insured companies and we say, why don't you just add cost plus drugs to your network so that you can get the benefit of this price? They're like, the PBMs won't let us do it. We'd like to, Mark. We'd like to buy it, but the PBMs control their formulary, so they won't let them add not only less expensive biosimilars of drugs they're already spending tens of millions of dollars on, but B, even new medications. If the new manufacturer won't pay them a rebate and only works on the net price, they won't add it to their formulary. And so when you add all these things up, I'm going out there talking to these big companies and saying, don't work through these bigger PBMs. There's a whole new generation of PBMs, the Right Ways, the Truth RXs, the Affirmed RXs, et cetera, that work on a pass-through basis. And what that means is they will be the ones, Matt, that will negotiate with the pharmaceutical manufacturers and negotiate as good a price as they can get. But whatever rebates they get back, they pass them through completely and verifiably to the corporations that they do a deal with. And they give them complete control of their data. And they give them complete control of their formulary. And they offer all the other services that the biggest PBMs offer. The only difference is they don't write that check up front for a rebate. And, just to go back on the big three, the biggest PBMs and what they do now, because they realize they're under assault from pass-through PBMs and more companies are switching to the pass-throughs. What the biggest PBMs are doing is over rebating, so rebating more than they probably should based off the rebates they would earn, and using utilization management to kind of make up the difference.
Mm-hmm.
And we're used to hearing about pre-auths preventing people from getting their medications. It's the exact opposite now. When you talk to people in companies and the HR people about whether or not they're having denials on pre-auths, maybe now and then they get step-ups and having to go through different things. But for the highest rebate drugs, they want more of them prescribed because they want to recapture rebates to make up for what they've already prepaid to these companies.
So is there a disadvantage, though, for a company to go to a PBM that is not one of the big insurers when the PBMs are now owned by the large insurance companies?
No, absolutely not. And a couple of different reasons. On the insurance side, for self-insured companies, they don't use the insurance companies as insurers in the classic sense. They're not taking the big insurance companies are not taking any true insurance risk for self-insured employers. That's why they call them self-insured employers. What they really are, TPAs, the people who do the authorizations of the claims and put together apps and put together networks. That's pretty much what the insurance companies do. And on the medication side, there just isn't anything unique that makes them stand apart, even if they're vertically integrated. So if you're a big enough company to self-insure, there's a good chance you can segregate your pharmacy benefit from your healthcare benefit, and you should.
At NYU Langone Health, we deliver the best outcomes in patient care, education, and science. We are a culture of exceptionalism. We measure ourselves against ourselves because we're our own toughest competition. We are audacious innovators who lead with science and evidence, treat every role as the most important, and connect as one integrated health system. We never lose sight of why we're here: to care, to teach, to discover, to compassionately deliver the best possible outcomes for our patients and for each other. We are NYU Langone Health.
So I want to zoom out to the election a little bit now. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of, you've become something of a surrogate for Kamala Harris's campaign. Would that be correct, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a paid surrogate, but but I'm doing it on my own volition.
And so, what healthcare issues are you talking to the campaign about?
All this,
the most.
When you talk about inflation, where we are is where you are. You're not going to get deflation because you drill, baby, drill, or do anything else for that matter. But there is a need for families to reduce their out-of-pocket expenses so that they can hopefully catch up. And the reality is real wages have grown over the last couple of years, so people are a little bit ahead of inflation across the board, but there are some families who still are not. And most of those families have out-of-pocket healthcare expenses. both drug and traditional healthcare. And so my conversations with her team are explaining how, you want to work with transparent PBMs, period, end of story. You want to make that a requirement. You want all prices to be published, not just, where the government does deals, not just for 10 drugs, but for all drugs. Because once you get transparency, you don't have to negotiate as a government. The market will negotiate for you. You want to do all the things that make this market an efficient market. And transparency is at the heart of it. Publishing whatever data and contractual information you can is also at the heart of it. If you do those things, you will see an immediate drop in prices and costs to every household that needs to buy medications. And for all the reasons we've just been talking about. If there wasn't, a net effective cost value, there'd be no reason for us to do all this.
I do wonder a little bit about what the limits of transparency might be. So you say that immediately we'll see an effect, everyone's costs will go down. I mean, what does that actually look like? So transparency goes in effect next week. What does that look like for me, healthcare consumer?
So if you walk into a big chain and you need imatinib, generic Gleevec, you're not going to be charged $2,000. If you were in a state that uses a bigger PBM and they're charging you, for specialty generics, quote unquote, they won't be able to hide the actual cost. They'd have to show it. And so when you have an efficient market, it's rather than it being unusual for somebody to know the price of a medication they pay before they need to pay it, it would be the exact opposite. And when you have that information, not everybody, but a lot of consumers get the chance to be a smart consumer. And that in general tends to push down the pricing itself. The underlying reason why this works quickly is because there's extortionate pricing that's out there. When an employer pays $2,000 for Gleevec or $8,000, maybe $2,000 net after rebate for Humira or one of the biosimilars, when they could be paying $594, all that dissipates immediately. Just like buying a car. You decide to buy a car, there's 100 different ways to get a price before you buy it. And so it's not going to save everybody the maximum amount every time, but it's certainly going to go a long way towards it.
Yeah, I mean, buying a car is a pain. I hate buying a car because
everybody does. Yeah.
I never actually know if I'm getting a decent deal or not. I do worry a little bit that healthcare consumers are so accustomed to paying big numbers and so accustomed to not looking at prices that maybe they won't be quite as quick to adjust to this new system as you.
Well, that's possible, like with anything, right? There's times when I've bought things, I'm like, oh my God, I got ripped off and I didn't realize it, But think of the 165 million people who get their insurance through their employers. They have a very specific interest in lowering their medication, their pharmaceutical costs. And they have people who hopefully are qualified enough to take those steps. That's where you'll see the greatest change the most quickly. And, if we go from a rebate-based system because of transparent prices to a net price-based system, then the whole game changes. And the other, I think, immediate response is deductibles go down and potentially premiums go down as well because the cost goes down, and you don't see the increases as quickly in Part D and other Medicare plans, Medicare Advantage, pharmaceutical plans, et cetera. So I think there'd be a dramatic and extreme impact immediately.
So you're imagining, go ahead, Matt.
Well, but in buying a car, there's also an element of that is not an entirely transparent interaction because there is kind of the salesperson has an ability in theory.
Yeah, look, bad example. I'm just trying to think of something else.
Well, I was saying but some of the people who argue for PBMs argue that they have this advantage that they can strike a side deal with pharma that the consumer can't.
Well, no, and that's true. The problem is they typically keep that delta.
Right.
There's no question that the biggest PBMs can negotiate the biggest and best deals. The question is, do they pass it through? And as you know, they've created these subsidiary companies called GPOs where they have the GPO who in 2 out of 3 cases is based offshore. And that company negotiates with the manufacturer. And then the GPO, after getting a price with the manufacturer, then negotiates with the PBM, but keeps part of the profits themselves so that the GPO retains profits. And that gives the PBM the plausible deniability to employers to say, oh, no, we pass through our entire rebate, when in reality they don't. And so the complexities of the car industry are you're probably right. Bad example. If you got a better one, I'm happy to use
I've been
it.
struggling to find a good one for 20 years. But the Trump administration did have some interest in PBM reform. Why is Harris the horse to take if this is your issue?
I don't think she's as transactional. I think she's looking at it more from a greater good perspective than, okay, this is something we looked at before. I don't know all the ins and outs of the 2019 plan, just that they were, looking to push the PBMs to be more open, but it didn't happen. So here we are, and something definitely needs to happen. I mean, and the good news is, because we do publish our price list, everybody, at least for the 2,500 we carry and growing, everybody gets to see what the true price actually is and what our costs are, for that matter. And so everybody's in a better position to negotiate. And, the Harris, I want to say campaign, I was going to say administration, but the Harris team recognizes the benefit of that. And so, and literally back in 2017 or 2019 rather, I went to the White House with Trump when Trump was in office and started to try to talk to them about this. And some of the people there were responsive and understanding of it, but he just wasn't. It wasn't something he wanted to talk about when I was in the Oval Office.
Are there other healthcare issues you're focused on right now?
Yeah, we started a company. It's actually not even a company. We started a group called Health Cost Plus Wellness. And we're not charging anybody or doing anything that's going to generate revenue at this time, but we're doing the healthcare for my employees and the lives that I cover as a self-insurer for the companies I own or run. And the goal there is to do direct contracting on the healthcare side and publish all the contracts. But as part of that, what we're doing is, let me take a step back. What I've learned in going through all this, we went out and talked to a bunch of hospitals, their CFOs, their CEOs, their HR people. And there are certain things that make common sense in hindsight, but I didn't think of, that impact the pricing of healthcare. And one, first and foremost, is the deductible. When we think about deductibles, we think of them in terms of the patient and how we have to pay out of pocket. But what we don't think of is who takes the credit risk for those deductibles. And it's the provider. It could be a primary care physician, it could be a hospital, but they take the risk. And in talking to many of them, depending on where they're located, they could have a 50 or 60% no pay rate, where they just have a loss rate of that much. And so that goes into increasing the price of healthcare. Then beyond that, in the deals they negotiate with the big insurers, the big insurers always fight with them over pricing. And so this might be even if it's a contracted price, there's so much nuance in healthcare. Like if you stay in the hospital 7 days instead of 6 days, the rate changes and all these little things. And so they actually fight over them. And the CEO of one big system told me that they lose 2% of their revenue because of the fighting with the big insurance companies. And that's only on a direct reduction. That doesn't include all the overhead associated with all the lawyers, the real estate, the benefits, et cetera. And then there's pre-auth, right? So going through healthcare pre-authorizations, that's not only a burden on the patient and or their family, but it's also a burden on the doctor, because the doctor has to go back and forth trying to explain to the insurance company why their medical opinion is valid. And not only does it impact the doctor, but it impacts the family of the people who need the care. So you might have a son or a daughter, and rather than being at work, you're talking to your HR to talk to the insurance company, since that's who's responsible for buying the insurance company, and you're having to deal with your son or daughter at home, and you're not able to go to work. So when you add all these things up, we realize that there's a reason why cash pay is far cheaper at a provider, because they don't have all these ancillary expenses associated with delivering care to somebody who just pays in cash. And so we've gone to these primary care organizations, hospital networks, you name it, and said, look, we want to negotiate a direct contract with you, but here are the fundamentals of what we're doing. We're going to pay you in cash the day the service is delivered. Period, end of story. Or if you want to bill us, you can, that's fine. We'll pay you in 10, 15, 30 days, whatever works best for you. And in exchange for that, there's going to be no pre-auths. We'll trust you until you give us a reason not to trust you. There's going to be no deductibles. We are responsible. So if I have a deductible in my company, I take the credit risk of that deductible. There's going to be no time wasted by your doctors. There's going to be no time wasted by our HR group. And as a result, we want a much lower price. Your price to a big insurer might be 250% of Medicare. We want 100% of Medicare. In some cases, a little bit more, some cases, a little bit less. And they're saying yes. Because when you really look at what the biggest insurance companies offer hospitals, it's just a sales funnel. Because again, if you look at the 165 million people covered by their employer, most of those self-insure. And so the insurance company isn't an insurance company. They're just adjudicate claims, and they act as a bank to a certain extent, and they just fight tooth and nail to not pay. And it gets even worse. Like,
it seems like the complexity of this system just drives you up the wall.
Yeah, because everything's an arbitrage. The more complex the system, the easier it is for a company to insert themselves or extend their cost or the friction that they introduce and charge people money for it. And so it does drive me up the wall, but that's the opportunity as well, because it really should be a 1955 old school system, because these big insurance companies, they're not insurance companies anymore. And so when I go talk to companies, whether it's for my company and doing direct contracting, or whether it's for their pharmaceutical benefit, their pharmacy benefit plan, I'm not saying do something that's not in your best interest. I'm not saying, don't save money, spend more, or get lesser care, or get lesser access to medications. I'm saying the exact opposite. I'm saying leave this big PBM and go to a pass-through PBM, because it's going to save you money, improve your wellness, give you more flexibility, help you understand your employee base and their healthcare needs, which in turn improve productivity and improve the culture of your organization. And they'll do it for less money, because they understand. It's like in the old days in the tech industry, no one ever got fired for dealing with IBM. Well, that's the same now. And the bigger question becomes, why have we gotten to this point? Why are these big companies doing business with these bigger PBMs that aren't passed through and being ripped off effectively? And the reason is, it's not the core competency of a CEO to understand how their healthcare works. But what's happening is that the numbers have gotten so big, it's the biggest expense after payroll, that now they can't not pay attention to it. Particularly now with me and my big mouth out there screaming and yelling that you're getting ripped off, and me sitting in face-to-face meetings telling them they're getting ripped off. We literally worked with one pass-through PBM for a large employer, and just by getting them to switch to Yusimry from the biosimilar they were sold on by their big PBM, they'll save over $50 million a year.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you that we can sort of burn all this down and make it make sense?
100%.
Really?
This is literally the easiest industry to to interrupt, to disintermediate that I've ever been involved with. Right? I've never seen anything so opaque. And when the best disinfectant is sunlight, and it's easy to open up the blinds and bring in the sunlight, I really think it's 100%. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that we will disrupt this industry.
And how long does that disruption take, do you think?
Well, we've already had a big impact in 2.5 years. And so, if we just keep on going the way we're going, I don't want to pick a date, but again, it's one thing to try to disrupt an industry and say, hey, pay a little bit more because it's for the greater good. That's not what we're asking. We're saying pay a little bit less, get better results because it's for the greater good. So it's not hard to sell it. We just have to get in front of people. And obviously the PBMs and the BUCAs, they're not sitting back saying, hey, Mark, take all of our business, disrupt us. It's all good. Thank you very much. They're fighting back in a lot of different ways. They're telling they're telling employers not to deal with us. They're telling manufacturers not to deal with us. They're increasing their rebates without telling them they're increasing their utilization management to pay for those rebates. They're not stupid. They move quickly. And so it won't be, it won't be quick as I'd like it to be, but it definitely will happen.
If it doesn't work, what went wrong? For you, if you're planning,
if it doesn't work for me, it means that the biggest PBMs and BUCAs already have changed on their own. And then it's just a matter of monitoring them to see if they revert back to bad behavior. So if one of them said, Mark, your cost plus 15%, we're big enough when we realize this industry is disrupted, we're going to do cost plus 1%. I'm gonna be like, okay, I'll just, my business will decline, but customers will know they can trust us and know we're not going to just change things on a whim. So we'll retain a bunch of business, but I'll be there waiting, and so if they go back to their old nefarious ways, we'll be okay.
So there's been a little bit of back and forth, perhaps, in the news recently about whether or not you wanted to become Health and Human Services Secretary. You said you were just trolling?
Yeah, I was just trolling. Same with FCC. I was just trolling. It's online. You're having fun sometimes.
But who do you think would have more power to disrupt the system? The HHS secretary or someone on the outside like you?
Someone on the outside. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things the HHS could do, but it's so bureaucratic. You can't. It's like when you talk to people or hear people talk about, we're just going to end the Department of Education. While I'm a libertarian at heart, I'm also a realist. You just can't break something down and cut it down to nothing and pretend that that's a possibility. It's not. I'm all for smaller, more efficient government, but that's one of the beauties, I think, of Kamala Harris not being a traditional Democrat. She's really moved to the center. She's for efficiency as well. And most importantly, she understands you can introduce, new technologies, artificial intelligence, and the gains don't necessarily mean you just have to cut everybody, but you can pass on the improvements in efficiencies and productivity, not have to add new people and pass on those improvements to the beneficiaries, the kids who need more lunch, the schools that need more teachers, et cetera. Those are the things that I think the Harris administration is more than capable of doing. I think people have the wrong impression that the goal is to bloat because they're Democrats. Honestly, not to get too political, but I think both parties effectively aren't driving the bus. I think the Republican Party is driven by Donald Trump. The Democratic Party is driven by Kamala Harris, and they're making the decisions. And in talking to her and her team, they want to do what the right thing to do is. They want more efficiency. They want, more effective government. They have no problem with smaller government. They just want to make sure the results are outsized. If you can have fewer people getting better results, they've been very clear they're all for it. And so that's why I've connected with them. They've never said to me, no, this new technology stuff is not good for everybody. They're like, no, AI is it. AI is our future. She, her speech in Pittsburgh, she was very clear that she wanted to support, personalized medicine, but using AI to reduce friction in government, reduce, scheduling, reducing permitting, all these things that are important to making government more efficient. So even, I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm an independent, but the independent libertarian in me likes what he's hearing.
All right, well, last question before we let you go. Do you drive your personal doctors crazy by trying to negotiate and all that sort of thing?
No, me personally, I got enough. I'll just pay the booked rate. I'm not an over negotiator. I'm happy. I'm an over tipper.
Well, Mark Cuban and Matthew Herper, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks, Torie.
Thank you.